All right. G'day. My name is Trevor, otherwise known as the Wealthy Warlock, and I'm here with Mike Forrest. Michael Forrest, would you like to let people know what's going on for you in the world of aliencarvings.com?
Yeah, absolutely. I came into this as a skeptic here about 5 years ago, and certain things of this topic intrigued me in terms of from a lapidary standpoint and a rock collecting standpoint. Some of the specimens and the things, the way it was being done was intriguing. I couldn't buy into it, but I wanted to know more and wanted to know more, and so now we've taken it pretty far and gotten a ton of science here recently that we've started to release just yesterday. And this is fairly compound microscopy. It's scanning electron microscopes and things of this nature, which is really easy to verify. And when you're dealing with carbon dates and thermoluminescent dates, which is things that we've gotten done in the past. On these objects, we saw 10,000, 15,000 years ago, 18,000 years ago, these date ranges that spanned all over the place.
Wow.
But unfortunately, none of this data is really something that can truly testify to the antiquity of these items. So we've been up against this, everybody thinks it's AI or hoax, and that's kind of what led me to at least get it documented properly. And so I wrote multiple books on this and documented as much of the topics that I could in terms of, what the people down there were saying. I've got multiple interviews with, people from the Toltec tribe. The way these pieces are being found is through oftentimes construction projects. There was a wind farm on one of the sacred mountains, and they found all kinds of stuff. And there was an aqueduct going into Tula, and again, I mean, they had to stop the project because they had ran into archaeological grounds, and so still there's no aqueduct in this place. And nonetheless, though, now there's people, this recent discovery you may have seen where there's this large sarcophagus that comes out of the ground. It's
Yeah.
absolutely mind-blowing. And a lot of people think it's, crazy off in the woods somewhere or out in the jungle, but that's not the case at all. This was actually during a septic tank dig in the backyard of someone in the town of Tula. So,
Wow.
Tula is built practically on or over an entire ancient town. And so, um, yeah, it caved in, and there's been some ridiculous finds just off of people's, backyard. And now people are getting wind of this and starting to really, expedite the technology with GPR and things of that nature to find what's really going on.
Yeah. Is that the sarcophagus that you mentioned, the one with does it have the crook and the flail on it? The crossed arms?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's remarkable because of the cross-cultural implications of that, it's just it's like Earth cultures, let alone not Earth cultures, it's
Yeah.
astounding. And
Well,
and that
you
was one
know,
of the ones, if I have interpreted some of the videos that I've been checking out from you, is that one of the ones that had a body inside of it? Has it been opened?
it has been open. It has a stone body inside of it.
Stone.
There was a video that someone made stating it was out of Guatemala and that there was an alien body inside. That is not true. That was misinformation. I've had to take, copyright strikes against that person for this. Um, but yeah, the real body, if there is one, it's going to be probably underneath. This was more like a monument that was found. It had all these tablets that showed practically the creation story is what it looks like of some degree. I mean, there's these beings with DNA, and they're
Yeah.
the Sumerian and Egyptian gods.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like you said, this cross-cultural relevance. Well, as I started to really break it down, you have King Pakal, who was found mummified and in a sarcophagus in Mexico.
Yeah.
Right. And we have pyramids in Mexico. The second biggest pyramid in the world is in Mexico, and then Egypt. So there could be a definite connection because of that alone. Just those technologies to create on that level, and how there's other pyramid complexes in the Orion's belt shape down in the Miko-chan area as well. It makes you wonder.
There's not many people who are aware of this either, but it does because of the fact that this is going on all over the place. For instance, in Australia, you've got some base level archaeology groups that are trying to get the truth out there a lot more, which is that we have Egyptian hieroglyphs here, we have elongated skulls here, we have pyramids here, we have all sorts of things that go back beyond 50,000 years of age construction,
Yes.
artifacts, and
Yep.
coins as well. And then the history of the original cultures here is like a lot of original cultures, an oral tradition, and so it's carried through even to this point to talk about how they seeded their races. There's one particular tribe near
Wow.
in Queensland that talk about the fact that they call them mobs here, that their mob was created from the seed of somebody, I can't remember who it was. I think it was somebody here on the earth and one of the seven sisters. So they
Ah,
all are very intimately aware of the connection with the Pleiadians or the Plagerians, depending upon where you go with that, or whoever they
yep.
might be, and their interaction with us. And there was this whole big magical box prophecy that happened in 2020 that was meant to be the end of the world, and Australia was the centerpiece for it. There was like all this crazy stuff going on. So we have archaeological evidence of Egyptian hieroglyphs that detail telling the story of Egyptians coming to Australia to learn about spirituality and energy and things like this. So
Yeah.
there's
What's
crazy.
funny is the Gosford glyphs there that you're
Yeah.
probably referencing.
Yes.
That there's actually symbology on there. It's not known in Egypt, but one of the glyphs looks kind of like a UFO, and we find this exact drawing all over the place in Tula and Awelos,
Yeah.
with the same score and everything
I
that it's
noticed
just
it
like
too.
that. And yeah, yeah. So, and it has some more cuneiform looking glyphs as well on that one wall. So it's kind of interesting to see, when that might have been, and it could be possibly from, older kingdom based on what the way the writing is, which
Yeah.
is,
One
yeah,
of the
yeah.
best reports I've seen on it from a Egyptian linguist, ancient Egypt linguist, who specializes in the nuances of how the hieroglyphs changed over the eons in the different king
Hmm.
eras and how they fluctuated in their priorities. He writes a really amazing report if you haven't seen it yet on the Gosford glyphs, detailing that this is a early form of hieroglyphs, and it's also been modified to include new information, likely Australian hieroglyphs, because there's a story of a snake
Wow.
that bites a royal
Huh.
member. And the Egyptians didn't have a name for this particular snake. They didn't have a name for the locations that they crashed at when this particular group had an
Yep.
issue. So there was all sorts of really amazing things like that. The alien
Yeah.
stuff as well isn't so well known, but if you talk to the locals in Gosford, they'll talk about directly underneath the surface there being tombs and chambers filled with
Huh.
similar sort of stuff.
Wow.
So that's what I mean is there's some really big things
Yeah.
coming out all over the
And
globe right now.
and then over on the other side over there, there's the Wagina and
Yes.
those type of depictions there, that mimic or look very much like aliens.
Mm,
Also, if you look into, you mentioned occult stuff earlier, and I
mm,
think that the Aleister Crowley was the first one to create a gray alien on record, and
yes.
his drawing is still the first. And his experience in Egypt, of all places, where he met this being, that was this alien-looking being. It's what inspired all of his work, and
Yeah.
so it's really fascinating to look through some of that and see that there is definitely an occult side of this that goes through history. That is not very widely known.
Clearly. A lot of people are remembering a lot more now, which is good, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Getting back onto your work though, um,
Hmm.
there was one thing that caught my attention very loudly, which was recently posted about on your page, was the potential alien grass seed. You remember
Yeah.
that? Now, tell me
Oh
about
no,
that.
yeah, yeah.
It was after opening a disc. What was this disc?
Yep, it's a mosaic stone disc from Abuelo Stilisco. And we had a team in the lab down in San Diego, California, world-class laboratory, and they'd opened it up. The people that run the lab are very interested in this. They were actually followers, which was such a
Wow.
small world moment because it's
Yes.
something I've been really trying to find is a confident lab that was going to be able to do the test that we needed. And so yeah, we got access to whatever. And there was a gentleman there, Mark Sims, and he had the wild hair. He's like, I'm gonna cut this open. He brought a bunch of his pieces in there, and so he cuts right along the line, and these things are banded together. There's a backing stone, and then they cut a bunch of stones and polish them into the shape, like a mosaic.
Mm.
And so he cut and split this thing in half, and he noticed there was this black trail or this water line that goes through it, and it's manganese deposits mostly and stuff like that, that you can see on there. However, where the trail ended was a seed that had been planted in there, so it's almost as if the water was smart enough to know where the life was going to come, and it found its way there. And it's quite the real amazing thing, because this is thousands of years of rain and water collecting on this piece. And where it happened is there's a bale that's drilled into the top of the disc,
Yep.
and that's where you put a chain or a piece of leather or something through, and that's where the water had collected and pushed through to get to that seed.
Wow. So it might have not have
Yeah.
even been designed to do that. It might have been a consequence of them making it wearable.
Well, no, I think that the consequence of making it wearable expedited the process. I
Yeah.
think in the Mayan tradition, they put this type of stuff in their offerings. We know of this,
Yes.
and what's really interesting, this one sprouted inside, and the roots penetrated into the actual geopolymer or the stone,
Yeah.
and fossilized and crystallized, which takes thousands of years in itself to do.
Literally.
What's kind of interesting is that these pieces are covered with a glaze. Like I said, it's a geopolymer, and this is something I'm going to get into in the
Yeah.
future videos, that we've got proof of now, that these pieces are sculpted and manufactured. They are not out of the earth. They are
Yeah.
not carvings like you would think. And that being
I
said,
just want to make sure that
uh,
everybody's clear on that. A geopolymer literally
yeah,
means a man-made or something made mixture, not a naturally occurring substance, isn't it?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
concrete
And
or
how
something.
that's done is yeah, it's exactly like an exotic ceramic, porcelain, or
Yeah.
concrete,
Yeah.
and even to the level that they covered it in a glaze.
Yeah.
And this glaze is really, really protecting against heat. So it's possible that they may have stored seeds and things of this nature inside of these pieces to hopefully, prevent disasters from destroying the seed
Yeah.
inside.
Wow.
It's bizarre, but I mean, the fact that it was rooted in there is beyond me, you know?
That's exactly like a seed bomb expected to be torched by a solar event. Like a solar wave that would blast the
Right.
planet could then crack that and be the seed of a new. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. And then the knowledge to do that is more
Yeah.
the bizarre thing to me. And we know this was done by the Mayan. So um, this is just
Had
a precursor to that, I guess. But
that was one of the
yeah,
ones I
wow,
wanted to ask you about was how do you know it's by the Mayans? Like, because some of it I think was discussed or raised the potential of it being brought here. I heard somebody mention in one of the videos, maybe. So how do you know
well,
where it's
well,
made
as
or
far as
go
I'm
ahead?
not saying that this specific seed or this species was the Mayan or had any influence of the Mayan at all. I'm saying that the process of putting seeds and gold and different things inside of their offerings
Gotcha.
was a known factor. So that practice obviously evolved, just like how they followed Venus and they had all these astrological things that they were very knowledgeable about. Well, it had to come from somewhere, right? And these pieces basically show just where it came from in that respect. I mean, there's definitely clearly you know, and even in Egypt, we have the Zepteki era where the gods walked with man, or you have the golden era in the Greek where gods walked with man. I mean, this is something fairly consistent in India, the Vedics, all these places you see this occurring. So it definitely has to be taken into account here, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that there's well and truly more than enough grounds for that, and I think there's enough people that are reporting upon their personal experiences of such that we need to take it legitimately, at least as a discourse,
Yeah.
without
Well,
disregarding it. Now that one caught
and
me, that seed caught my attention because, like you pointed out, it's fossilized and it's also remarkably detailed in terms of how it's been documented. So the photos that you've got that have been sent to you, the videos, they just for the viewers have the trichromes from the root itself. Like it's not just a seed that has cracked open, it's a seed that has germinated and started to then go into its next stages of development, sprouting an entire root
yeah.
system. And then it's fossilized from that point. So I think that that's absolutely remarkable. I think one of them was talking about how it was a Mexican traditional grass seed, potentially, was it?
Yeah, one of three species, and that was before I think it's called the Mezcali event or something of that nature, where they brought seeds in, and it kind of changed, But there's the ancient grains that they had there, and Yeah, they said it couldn't identify. It was just an AI analysis of the grain seed itself. So we
Uh,
still have to get it in front of experts to study that more and
yeah,
find out exactly what it is.
yeah, definitely.
And same with the carbon dating, because there's a likelihood that we could probably extract carbon from there as well.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that and ask you about it because you mentioned carbon dating. Everyone knows about carbon dating and some of the issues that general archaeology and other people have with that, regardless of whether it gives you an idea of that. Some people just go, you know what, we're not going to talk about that for some reason. But
Yeah. Yeah.
what about the other one that you mentioned, the bioluminescent one, was it? The luminescent cut?
Thermoluminescent.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
tell us about that.
Yeah,
What does that bring?
thermoluminescent dating is often used in ceramics. So essentially, if you have an old ceramic, you can drill into the core of it, and where it hasn't been exposed to light, or if you have a cave or of a tomb or something like that that you just opened up, you could dig down into the soil and get some quartz samples, and then because it hasn't been exposed to light since likely when the cave was dug or last opened, it would give you an idea of how old the cave would be or how old the ceramic would be
Wow.
based on it sees when it was last exposed to the light. And so, in this case, these pieces being geopolymers, now that we know, there should be a way to thermoluminescent date the pieces themselves because this stone is made and so the core of it likely was exposed to light at this time of creation, which in a specimen out of the earth where it was cooked at 2600 C inside the earth at some point, you're not going to have this type of knowledge because it would be the dawn of time or when this piece was created. But because there are manufactured stones, it opens up a whole new avenue of research that we have yet to do the research on. It's taking a whole nother practice because it's not going into the samples in the same fashion as you normally would. So,
Yeah.
you know, but yeah, it's definitely something that's going to be, I think, talked about because what opens up with this geopolymer research is there's a book called The Natron Theory, and it goes into this possibility that even the pyramid blocks in Giza were created with this geopolymer process
Yeah.
versus, and that would make a lot of sense because if you look at Mexico, or not Mexico, but South America rather, down in Cusco, you have these giant walls and
Yeah.
at the bottom, and this is all over the world, like you Temple of Apollo,
Mhm.
Baalbek, at the bases of these foundations, you have these massive megalithic stones that nobody knows how they move. They're hundreds of tons. And then as you go up in construction, it's been redone or fixed, or they added onto the wall. The construction quality gets lesser and lesser as you get newer and newer. That's really important to look at because it seems as if some point the ability to cast geopolymer stone was
Exactly.
lost.
Yeah. Because I did see a report on something about one of those retaining walls that was tested and found it to be an amalgamous material, suggesting a
Right.
polymer base as opposed to a naturally occurring substance. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, it's definitely one that I wanted to touch on. Because yeah, a lot of the pyramid that I mentioned in Australia that is most well known as the Gympie one, and a lot of the blocks that were foundational for that were actually removed as soon as any interest started to accumulate about it, removed by
Wow.
certain individuals. So we can't do any of those tests anymore, but we still have astounding, remarkable traits of they have different names for them, and it's hard to recall them all. But the different types of petroglyphs that the originals here created to mark out landscapes and mark dangerous territory, like where there's uranium or other things like that close to the surface.
Interesting.
Awareness of their society around the environment that they incorporated was clearly at a level of integration that we would consider to be like our body, how we're aware of our body. Our original cultures were aware of the land like that. They just had this, I guess there was nothing else to do aside from be aware of these things, you know. But
Right.
the the big thing that I really want to focus on a lot is moving forward from this point, I guess. Yeah, let's talk about those aliens. Like we've got some pretty good pictures there behind you. We've
Yeah.
seen a lot of discussion around these things lately within the world. The US has been doing all sorts of what do they call them interviews at the White House up there about congressional hearings about disclosure events and things like this, pilots and all this. But this is clear as day evidence of integrated culture.
Yeah.
Not just like, hey, we saw this guy flying past, but hey, we actually were sitting opposite him and we were carving him out, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it shows detailed genetic manipulation, DNA strands, vats of liquid with species being clearly manufactured.
What?
Um, I
Really?
mean, oh yeah, here I'll show you here. Hang on one sec. I got a sphere right over here that shows. I mean, it's pretty deep.
Oh man, some of that stuff is amazing.
Yeah, it's got.
Oh,
So you've got a pharaoh here,
yes,
and he's holding up this DNA strand.
clear as day.
And let's see, over here you've got Thoth
No way.
with this vat of liquid, and there's a being right there coming off the DNA
Yeah.
being lowered into that thing. And on this side over here, you've got Anubis,
That was one
and
of them.
he's like helping Thoth. I'll see if I
Yep.
can get it to focus here.
Yep. Yep. Yes, yep.
And it's got the feathered serpents or the serpents, chasing its tail.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
That's
So that's
crazy.
that's this the sphere, and the sphere was sold to me really inexpensively. I think I paid, I mean, it was less than $500,
Holy
and
fuck.
the guy was just looking for money, and he had found it up on the hill, and so I got this thing, and this is one of my very first pieces way back in the day. I was trying to find people in Mexico, and there was this guy. He was just kind of down on his luck and would go up in the mountains and find these things and sell them, right? And so he found this, and then 3, 4 months later, he messages me, brother, I found something. I think it's the base of this spear that I sold you. And so I'll go grab the base here.
Oh,
And,
no
and
way.
so he finds this base and he's like, it's got to be for that. It was right in the same area and there's no sphere or anything with it. We've dug all around and there's nothing. And so sure enough, this piece, and he sends it to me for free. Okay. For free, which to me is just remarkable in itself. To get anything for free these days. But on the back here, it's got. I don't know if you can see her
Yep.
sitting there.
Yeah.
Steve's sitting there, and they're holding up maybe a
Breastfeeding.
board. But yeah, this is like ISIS breastfeeding an alien, and
Holy
I
shit.
saw this was 2021 when I got this piece, and I didn't really know enough about history and Hathor and Sophia or anything of this nature at that time. But 2 years later, 2023, I get this piece, and this came from Tool Hill Doggo, completely unrelated. I had never documented that sphere before, and I mean, there it came in full 3D.
Yep. There you go. Holy shit. Wow.
So, and there's Saturn above her, and yeah, that whole Sophia story is I mean, I study it every day at this point, the Pistis Sophia and some of these Gnostic texts, because there's absolutely probably truth in it based on what I've seen here.
Just to catch our friends up who are listening in, what exactly would you point out as the parts that are important in that tale? The Sophia.
Well, in the Pistis Sophia, it's essentially a tale of Jesus's teachings to his disciples and Mary Magdalene after his resurrection. And it does talk about him coming back in the Bible. I believe it's in Luke where it talks about him coming back and teaching the disciples certain things. So it has relevance there. And the Pistis Sophia was found with the Nag Hammadi stuff down there in Egypt in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
It was translated first into Latin, only one of the three papyri. And it took until 1973 or 1974 when JJ and Desiree Hurtak got a hold of it and translated all three of the papyri into English. And so it's a fairly new document. Most people aren't familiar with it. However, because it's in Jesus's words to his disciples, the amount of teachings that are in there are wild. It talks about how he took the fallen power by 1/3 and would not allow them to succeed as they did in the beginning. And he takes and he hides the Sophia away, and she is kind of our soul in a sense. She's our mother soul, and that's where our souls go to. And what's funny is they've recently disclosed these remote viewers that are remote viewing people when they do DMT, and like finding out where they go on this substance. And it's all like multiple remote viewers are all coming back with this same location in space.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating. Maybe that might be where she's hidden, and that could add some validity to this logic, that's where we would go. Because if you look at DMT as a substance, it's found naturally in our body
Yeah.
twice, that we can record, once in the womb and once when we die.
Yeah.
That being a great recipe for our soul entering and exiting the body. And when you do DMT, your soul leaves your body. I mean, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
No question. So it's an
Anybody
interesting
who's experienced
correlation,
that.
you know?
Yeah. It is. But
Yeah.
there's, I mean, there was a lot that you touched on there, and empirically, I think that it's. Well, let me ask you this: have you seen? It's been coming out recently. The telepathy tapes.
I don't, unless it's the ones with the raw things that
No,
I or the no,
that's the
okay.
law of
I'm
one. I
not
think.
familiar then.
Yeah.
Law of One. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
The
Yep.
Law of One is amazing work. I absolutely love that, and work with the energies of the entities behind that still myself. But when you
Yeah.
get to the telepathy tapes, that's by a woman who started a podcast talking about nonverbal autistics and her work with them. And she
Oh.
started to talk about and communicate about these things with certain families who were having these kids and having problems with these kids. But the problems were problems that the standard system were not acknowledging. Things like the fact that the kids could communicate when they were not meant to, the fact that they could
Mhm.
read everybody's mind, but they couldn't communicate. And the remarkable aspect is we're talking 100% accuracy,
Wow.
100% accuracy in reading minds. So she gets a whole bunch of these individuals together and talks to them and says, well, what do you guys do when you're not doing anything? Like, because we're talking about nonverbal autistics. And she says, and she finds out from a group of these individuals that mostly autistic people to a certain degree gather together in what they call the hill. And the hill is a place that exists in the energetic realms. I don't try to conceptualize a lot of this sort of stuff into words because I'm aware of the limitations of words, and I also experience outside of the words myself in these places. But the
Mhm.
idea is that yes, there is another side to this reality, so to speak. And while I don't exactly talk about it like that, it's a very simple way to describe it. But this energetic place clearly has people, places, and beings like this. I've worked in it in what the in New Zealand in Aotearoa, the Maori call the Wairua. Um, in Australia, your original Australians call it the dreaming. You know, we might call it the astral projections, the dreaming realms,
Mhm.
the DMT spaces, all of these things. And DMT,
Yeah.
if you're still on the ballpark of thinking that it's just a drug, then you need to go and experience it before you keep talking about something you don't understand. Um,
Yeah.
but
That's
even without these substances, somebody like myself who engages through shamanic practices and other things like this is very well versed in this other world and how it's structured apart like that, where you do have the dead people, where you do have the sleeping people, where you have the heavens and hells and all the rest of it. It's not, I deliberately put the heavens and hells up here because there's no direction in any of this.
yeah.
It's impossible to describe when you're talking about unity because language is the design of separation. So you can't talk about something that's whole by using language. You have to experience it like that. So I understand and I see a lot of what you're talking about in this sort of stuff and where these entities might be coming from a lot of this sort of stuff. Why they're doing this. I mean, why they're doing it. Why is it important that other entities from other places in the universe have such an opinion of importance about this tiny little dirt rock in the middle of nowhere? Why? Because it's not to do
If
with the
the
dirt. It's life.
or or they're not from some other existence. They're something that was here all the time. And in that Pistis Sophia, to go into that a little bit further, it talks about how he forced them to look to the left for a period of time and force them to look to the right for a period of time. And it doesn't talk about what that time period is. And however, I could totally understand if it was the Mayan calendar where we have the ending of an era. We're going into this age of Aquarius. There's all of these time changes and era changes going into these new things that are documented around this time, right? And a lot of people prophecy that that's going to happen at some point. So this could very well be that happening, and they may be now looking to the left. That might be why the government in the United States used to eliminate people who talked about this. But
Mm.
now it's almost as if, like you had mentioned, that they're having congressional hearings, and those people who are blowing the whistle, they're not just coming out of their back pocket, like running to the police and saying, "This is my story." They are asking the government for permission first to even to talk about this. So the government has approved everything that they say in these books and through these congressional hearings, and I feel that that's obviously a controlled disclosure to some extent. We
Obvious.
were burning witches in our streets 200 years ago in Europe and America.
Yeah.
They knew something about the occult that they are not telling us today,
Yeah.
because otherwise no one would have ever stood for that. I
Yeah.
mean, people knew back then that it was a real thing, obviously. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten behind that.
It was only in the 70s here in Australia where Australian legislative assemblies recognized the original people of Australia as not a feature of the landscape. They were classified as flora and fauna before the
Wow.
70s. The 70s.
So,
Yeah, so it's crazy how
yeah.
this stuff sort of goes on. But you point out something very clear, which
Yeah.
is an institutionalized shift in regards to what is allowed to be talked about and what's acceptable. And that's very exciting. Now, I did want
Yeah.
to bring up a bit more about the alien stuff again, because we did touch on prior to talking about the alien handbooks and stuff like this. And I want to talk about that a bit more
Mhm.
because I do want people to be aware of the fact that this is a very open and discussed about subject. Even though people don't talk about
Yeah.
it a lot, people do integrate and interact with it on all sorts of scales. It's the taboo that prevents them talking about it with their family and friends. So let's make it a bit more
Hmm.
normal. What do we know about these
Yeah.
races? Do we have any governments who support these ideas or correlate with these ideas?
Well, I don't know if you've seen the book by Craig Campobasso, but he wrote this book that's called the Extraterrestrial Species Almanac, and he was given the files from MUFON from thousands of reportings over the years, and so he comprised, like, I think there's 81 species inside of this book. And it's really, it takes the KGB one to a whole nother level in a sense, or it's a more modern perception on it, but it includes a lot of that type of detail. And yeah, as far as um, I'm trying to think what your other question was there. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
comment.
Sorry,
And
I got
like
off on a sidetrack there. Yeah.
the KG, that's okay. The KGB one that you mentioned is one that was bouncing around the internet a lot and did get a lot of controversy about it, probably because it contained a lot of truth, which was a handbook that
Yeah.
the Soviets used to carry around before the fall of the curtain that detailed if they ran into any entities or any phenomenon out in the field, what to do or how to interact with them. Now,
Yeah.
this is an older document, and you mentioned in one discussion that we've had about how there's been build on that as well. I'm going to check out that book though. Who is the author?
It's Craig Campobasso.
How do you,
Probably pronouncing that wrong,
how do
but
you
it's
spell his
it's
name?
it's it's Craig's and then Campaor OBASO or something like that. Yeah,
That's okay.
I'm
Google will
horrible
come
with
up with it, I'm sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
You'll find it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you'll find it.
Um,
Yeah, and on that note, the amount of coming out about this and how you asked if the governments were knowledgeable about it, and I think there's documents that exist that clearly show they were remote viewing the Ark of the Covenant here. There's a released Pentagon document that came out about this. They also spent millions of dollars on Skinwalker Ranch that we know about, yet the research is not allowed to be released. And they're even doing a show about it and celebritizing it. and kind of probing at it, trying to gain money from this phenomenon. Yet the government knows and spent millions of our tax money on it, yet they don't disclose, even acknowledging that there's something going on this ranch. And
Mm.
that's, I think, really the proof in the pudding is why they were able to justify so much money investment there. And the story behind it is not aliens and UFOs from another galaxy. It's a curse that was put on the land by one of the Indian tribes there, the Utes, I believe it is. And so they put this curse on the other tribe that they were having a war and they cursed that land. And you look at the science behind it, it absolutely seems as if there's like a temporal rift or some sort of opening that allows passage from other dimensions in and out of our dimension there, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah, all this sort of stuff makes a lot of sense for me. I did a bit of research on Bradshaw Ranch in Arizona, another one that's got a bit of a
Oh, yeah.
repute, not as big as a Skinwalker, but one that does have a multi-dimensional rift, has interesting USA. I think it's lands department that govern that particular area, or the geology department for some
Interesting.
reason. I can't remember, but they've got all
Hmm.
sorts of really bizarre equipment they find in the hills and unexplained phenomenon going out the wazoo. There's one particular science guy I follow who makes his own detection equipment, Schumann resonance detectors. He makes his own Tesla coil to interact with these entities and stuff like this, and captures a lot of it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's a great thing to bring up is Nikola Tesla's work. And
yes,
he claimed he was speaking with aliens. He created this device. There's patents and everything all about this, that he was having conversations with what he thought were aliens. And so that's pretty interesting as well. And the fact that his research is so heavily guarded, what he actually came up with, it it could very well have dramatic effect. Like we were talking about that geopolymer, the ability to make that stone. Well, it's possibly that's connected here, and we look at the pyramids depicted on some of these artifacts from Mexico, and it shows them clearly utilized as machinery, creating energy waves out the tops of them, and different things. And with the recent discoveries in Giza with these SAR scans, that there may be extreme mechanical looking coils or something like that underneath the pyramids. You really have to wonder is okay, maybe these things were alchemical devices, and in the stories of magic and alchemy in our mythology is actually a time period that was ended due to this technology or this reset. And that might be why we actually have in Athens, Greece, and we actually have some of these ancient sites that are mythology, yet they exist,
yeah, yeah, it is. It's God. I just There's so much to talk about. I don't know what to do. But I
Yeah,
want to shift
I
back
know.
to the
Yeah.
aliens that you've been discovering in the ground there. In particular, the
Yeah.
red head with the white stuff. In you mentioned your interest in lapidary. First of all,
Mhm.
what sort of stone is that? The side head that you've got there.
Yeah, this one here
Yeah.
is it's very interesting. We've had it detected. It's a jasper and quartz. And what's crazy is down in the inside of it, it's bored out, and there's a full-on geode crystal cluster inside of that thing.
What?
And yeah, oh yeah, and the geode inside of there is phosphorescent with the black light as well.
No way. Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah, it's quite the
'Cause
piece, and
if
it's about yeah. Yeah.
wow. Because yeah, there's a lot that can be talked about that very quickly. The ability for a crystal to grow on something like that artificially, let alone naturally, can be done in your own home. There's crystal growing kits that people can pick up from cheap
Yeah.
shops nowadays. But the real stuff, like the real crystals that probably featured in there, quartz or other things like this, yeah, they don't. It's not an easy achievement. That is not.
No, no. In
I
fact,
don't want to
I've
say
looked so
impossible.
hard to try to find something similar geologically, and I couldn't find
Exactly.
a cross specimen like that. And we actually find, let me see if I have it sitting over there. I don't. I have this whistle, and I mean, well, I got one of them here. I'll show you.
Yep.
And the whistles, one of them is clearly two separate stones put together. And that's how they were able to hollow it. But these are all geopolymer whistles. This is like a rock, but it's completely hollow inside. You can play it like a whistle.
Wow.
I don't know if you can hear it because the noise canceling, but
Yeah, it dropped. It hit one note and then the noise canceling dropped. But the note that did
yeah.
come through, the musical note, that was impressive. I've
Oh,
seen a
it's
couple.
solfeggio scale.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of those coming out of Central South America lately. Actually, more modern created ones, like birds and other things like this, weird flutes and ceramic playing instruments. So I guess
Hmm.
it's a cultural thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. The Mayan, they made water whistles and they made other whistles, and they achieved, I think, it's in the hundreds of different birds that they could call with these whistles.
Yeah, that's right. They did, didn't they? And
Yeah.
also, they
Yeah. And
had
we
ones for
found the water
jaguars.
whistles. I believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. It's so crazy how, again, it would noise cancel, but some of them, I mean, they sound just like the tribal sound effects you would hear on a movie or something,
Yeah.
like they're very tribal.
Real.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, because when you get into that
yeah.
sort of stuff, the solfeggios and the sound frequencies, I mean, that's literally what I consider to be dimensional travel and stuff like that. It's
Bingo.
the integration of sound across distances or travel of information across distance, and that can be facilitated through any means, as long as it's a means that
Yeah.
facilitates the transformation of that. So
Did you know it's illegal to chant in the tombs and the temples in Egypt?
yes, that
Yeah,
they'll
and that's
even
why.
that they'll even stop you. I hear that they'll even stop you from sitting down in the king's chamber meditating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a reason for that. I have a clip I'll send you of JJ Hertzog over there. And he does an Amun Ra chant. I think he only does it 3 times before he tells everybody to quiet down. But every time I hear it, I feel like, I mean, every hair on my hand and body and hair, it's just
Yeah.
the most powerful thing I've ever heard. So I truly believe that they had mastered this frequency and these names. JJ, his work goes into these divine names and saying them, and they've actually shown that it has like effect on your DNA by saying these frequencies, and they actually harmonically do things to your DNA in a
Yeah.
proficient way, I guess. So, yeah, it's really interesting to know that that's illegal over there, and for what purpose. There's just no good reason that you would stop people from singing, right?
Especially when you're trying to make tourism joyous, creative,
Yeah.
happy, get people in, enjoy your time, but then you get the other form of tourism like a museum. Shh, can't move through, don't
Yeah.
make any noise. Now, I got
Right.
excited
Yeah.
about the crystal, but do you have any idea of the races that might be depicted by some of these artifacts that have been coming out of Mexico or Tula or the others?
Yeah, we find the mantis, we find the aquatic ones with gills like that one. We find just the typical gray aliens. We find these type of beings here that you can see.
Yeah.
They've got
Ones with the like a
this
mask.
thing on this thing that goes on their face, right?
Yeah.
And so underneath of this garment, they look like Davy Jones with all the tentacles coming out of their face.
I was going to ask you,
And
I've
what's
seen depictions. I'd never known if that was the actual face or whether it was something that was removable.
Yeah, no, that's a garment, and we have enough depictions of them to show that confidently. And what's interesting is that it almost seems as if there's an evolution or something where they wanted to get rid of that. And if you go into the Egyptian history of Kem and Kemet,
Mhm.
they would strap this beard on the pharaoh that had this long thing. You'll see it on King Tut's death mask, this long beard that comes down. Well, they would braid their tentacles and create these beards, and so that's actually that beard originates from the creators in Kem. That's why they do and wore that as a pharaoh. So knowing that Osiris is the first pharaoh, and if you look at his legs in every depiction, they're bound together. None of them are like this, they're all like this. And it talks about how Isis would have to bandage his legs every day, and so we think that it's plausible that he may have been one of the first ones out of the water. There's this aquatic mermaid species like Dagon
Yeah.
that you'll find talked about. And you look at the Pope of the Catholic Church, there's even resemblance to Dagon in the hat that they wear.
Yes.
And so here's one of the, you can see the tail on here is
Yep. Fish.
it looks like a mermaid,
Yep.
yeah. And then so these serpent beings, some of them look like, the genie on Aladdin, where they just have a specter like wispy serpent tail. And then there's some with the fins, and there's some that walk just like we would. So
So do you think that these ones that we're talking about now are tied to the same from the Dogon tribe? Have anything to do with that?
absolutely, the Nomo, 100%. You have to go back with the Dogon and ask, why did they get exiled out of Egypt in the first place?
That's a good
And they're the
question.
people of the dog. And who was Anubis? I can connect a lot of things. I can connect
I've seen
Osiris
Anubis.
and
Yeah.
Horus to Marduk and to Jesus as Christ conscious, whatever you want to call it. Zeus and all these different beings that these gods manifested as here in this physical, the material world. But I think that Anubis is a really it's got me. It's I know who Ra is, and or Amun Ra, how this was combined together at one point, and why we still say Amen and this
Yeah.
type of thing with the biblical as well. I feel that there's a logical connection with the demiurge and how that he actually impersonated God at one point, the Saturn or Lucifer being. But it's still, who's Anubis then? And so why is he guarding the afterlife with Horus in a lot of depictions? Is it plausible that, there's more to this story? And if you look at the Sumerian, where you have Tiamat, and in the Egyptian you have Sekhmet, both of these are a chaos being,
Yeah.
and they both are fallen females. And if you look at the story of the Pistis Sophia, she is a fallen entity, one of the 30 original thoughts of the creator, and so she may be one of those seven sisters like you mentioned, and so she fell to Satan in this book, and that could be where Tiamat came from, that could be where Sekhmet came from. And so in Tiamat raised up the reptilian armies, so she created a lot of things, and that might be how the demiurge trapped her and created the whore of Babylon, and why we have Inanna and Ishtar and Ninhursag and all of these different Marys and Isises throughout the history, all stemming from the Hathor cult. And that I think Hathor was the Ra's construct, or her, excuse me, she was the eye of Ra, or the consort of Ra. And so it's plausible that there's something connected there with the demiurge, as well as Yahweh, or the source creator. Ra could be that source as well, and Amun Ra may be the demiurge stepping in and merging with Ra to take over for that, or something of this nature. Still a big question. But Anubis and the dog people, to go back to the
Yes.
Dogon and the
Yes.
Nomo, they came out of the sea. They were an amphibious race that helped them and gave them technology and taught them things, and then they were exiled from Egypt. So were the Nomo part of Egypt at one point too, and then they completely exiled that out of there? And I believe so, yes, because there was a gate that was taken down. I have pictures of it, and it absolutely had what looked like a gray alien right there near the complex at Giza.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is real proof that they got rid of the Dogon, the Nomo, and pushed all that out.
I think so. I'm sure you would have either heard of, if not seen, the declassified documents of stargates on the plateau of Giza from
Yeah.
Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah, and same with Iraq and with the ziggurats, and
Yeah.
I definitely think all that's connected,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, I do think so too. When I think about a lot of the stuff that you just strung together there, very well done. I really like to hear people who have a good solid grasp on such extensive ideas and are able to conceptualize them within a model of understanding that isn't just whoa. But
Yeah.
I particularly like one particular part of the Law of One that I dove into a bit more than usual was the where Ra comes from and these ideas. It sort of backs up into the ideas of Sophia from the Nag Hammadi and other concepts like this, that Jesus himself, while he might have been an entity that was born, was kind of embodying the concept of the crystallized consciousness of the planet or something like that, the identity of Earth itself. which then, if you flow with as above and so below, from our perspective, then you've got the idea of a conscious and subconscious version of a planetary scale intelligence. So when you look at the law of one with this understanding of what I've just laid out, you sort of see Ra decide that they're the positive side of the mental energy of Venus, and Lucifer seems to be the negative side of that energy. In fact, in one particular passage,
Yep.
he talks about how everybody from Venus, prior to Earth ever being created or populated in any capacity, was something like 3 individuals from the entire species of Venusians chose not to ascend, but chose to descend. So that way everybody else could ascend. These 3 entities
Huh.
created a negative entity out of Venus, and everybody else created this positive entity out of Venus. Right? So now we've got the demiurge of Venus and the unity of Venus, which is the same tale that we
Right.
get from the sun, right? That the sun, if you believe that the sun is a creator, you're falling for the demiurge. But if you see that there's a creator of the creator of the creator, you see through the illusion of the ego of the sun, no, I'm the big one. You should pay attention to me because I'm right here in front of your face. You sort of
Yeah.
start to see some interesting patterns play out very quickly,
Yep.
you know?
Yeah, and you look at history with people like the Cathar and what they believed in, and how that 9 different popes went into eradicating them completely off the earth. And then also you look at the Holocaust situation as well, which a Holocaust by definition is a burnt offering, and why they called it that, it wasn't just a burnt offering into the sky. This was a burnt offering to Saturn.
Yes.
And the Nazis obviously worshipped the black sun and the cube and all of these things, and they were after these relics. They had an idea that the Ark of the Covenant and the Spirit, all these things were powerful. They were creating levitating devices, or UFO looking devices, and this plans for this bell. And
Yeah.
you look at the Kecksburg crash with this bell that came in there.
Yeah.
I feel that there's a real logical perception that the demiurge has taken over worship in Christianity, in Judaism, and maybe beyond, in this fashion of the Holocaust, were actually the burnt offering to Saturn, and they got rid of 95% of these people, and then they refueled them back up. That's why the Saturn worshiping Roman Catholic Church is the Romans. They worshiped Saturn at one point. Overnight, Constantine's like, "Yep, we're on board now to praise Jesus, even though we just killed him."
Yeah. It's funny how it worked, isn't it?
What? Yeah.
No,
And
that's
then they move Jesus's birthday to Christmas. Excuse me, they move Christmas, which is on Saturnalia.
yes.
So again, we have the Saturn holiday where we're paying false respects in a time that, and since a little kid, I always got very emotional during Christmas, and I was so burned when my family told me that there was no Santa. I had believed in this with my heart, like,
I was
oh yeah, this
14
has
when
to
I
be
found
real,
out.
right?
I was 14
Oh
when I
man,
found
I'm
out.
so sorry. Yeah, see,
That's
I've
crazy.
got a 3-year-old, and he's not doing that. There's no way, because I feel that they promote candy gift giving, which causes people to it's all to divide and to sin. It's a very sin filled holiday, which it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Same with Easter, with the
Yeah.
Easter bunny and all this type of stuff. Like, people don't even know what Easter means. I didn't
Not anymore.
understand it fully, that it was, that, oh, it's to celebrate the resurrection. Well, cool. What are we actually celebrating? And that's the overcoming of Ishtar and the whore of Babylon. They took her
Mm.
away, and that's where our species, we had all these hybrid species that are talked about in mythology, griffins, and all this experimentation. It's like someone just left their experiments and said, okay, I'm done. We don't have any more new experiments. There's no new species on this earth. And for a country to go about making one, it's very frowned upon, and something
Yes.
that could spark a war, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah. Despite the fact that
Even just
human
CRISPR,
economy,
even the controversy of, yeah, CRISPR, was such a controversial thing.
yes,
So
it is. It is.
we're not meant to play God on that level, it seems like.
Well, that's the question of it, and when that's ultimately asked, then we evoke images of the fall of Atlantis, the eating of the apple from the fruit of knowledge, and all of this sort of stuff. But I think that
Yeah.
that's heavily influenced by the confusion. Like when we were talking about a bunch of different things there, I think if I take away a lot of the labels that we're using there, you've, from my general perspective, and this is very grand, you've got two forces, one for ignorance and one for awareness, and that seems to be the craft of what's going on. And if nobody's taking a side, then it seems to be that the effort is to keep somebody in the middle. So that way they can't choose,
Right.
you know, and that's the push of the society that we're in right now, that's disposable, consumerist, detached
Yeah.
digital entity that isn't attached to anything else. Um,
Yeah.
but this is also very important discussion points because when we talk about aliens, we talk about technology that we don't conceptualize here on the planet, like living computer systems, actual, not AI, intelligence technology, like real intelligence,
Hmm.
metal that changes form when asked, and things like this. Which has slowly
Yeah.
been talked about a bit more in the scientific circles, with AI being turned into exploring the different isotopes and maps of chemical elements that we can't
Yeah.
imagine. There's
Yeah.
interesting, yeah, but can you speak on anything in terms of that as to what you've been learning in Mexico as to alien technology or what some of this sort of stuff is showing? I remember seeing a
Yeah.
disc of a spacecraft in one of the videos, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We found probably 40 plus different craft, different saucers and, this type of stuff here, which is like reminds me of something right off of stuff. This is heavier than I expected it to be. It's one hands. There we go. But I mean, this thing's got a jetpack on the back and
What?
seats in there. Yeah, I mean, there's
It's a
full on
jetpack out
like
of a
whistles that
cartoon.
are right. And that's the thing. We find things like the Space Needle. We find all kinds of things from science fiction. We find the xenomorph. We find things, it's almost as if our imagination is connected to something that maybe happened a long time ago. Maybe
Yeah,
these inspiration, maybe it's orchestrated at a level we can't fully fathom. It does all orchestrate through the pineal gland, which again is where the DMT and these type of out of body experiences exist. And so if there is another dimension out there that Nikola Tesla had tapped into talking to, beings in, then I think that could very well have influence on some of our creative talents, especially those that used psychedelic substances in the 60s and 70s, and those who came up with these crazy, well, I'm not going to say crazy ideas, but they were way ahead of their time. And that could very well be where it comes from. People look down on the Ouija board heavily and say it's not a good thing to use, and we found these Ouija boards all over in Mexico with Saturn right on there.
yeah,
And so it's plausible, like just like we were talking with the Nazis, they had the Vril and the Thule societies
yeah,
that were using occult practices. So it's plausible that some of these things, even as far as going as King Solomon with the ring he was
yeah.
gifted by an angel, that might have been a trickster demon saying it was Gabriel, but it really wasn't, and that might be why he got possessed by demons or devoured by demons rather in the end. It wasn't a good thing. This is a whistle here, and it's got this guy with a control panel inside of there.
Is that a DJ?
And yeah, right, it does. Yeah. Yeah. I
No
mean,
way. Wow.
and it's got like a rib thing, but yeah, you can play it. I'll see if we can get one note out here
Yeah.
at
Okay,
least.
putting that in.
Yeah.
We've got a couple more.
Spaceship whistle.
Yeah, I'll have to figure
Yeah.
out how to turn off the sound for later. You know.
No, it's my earbuds. The new earbuds are notorious for noise canceling. It's
Oh,
great,
okay.
but it's also penalizing sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. I know Zoom's got an automatic canceller as well, which is what I'm using, FYI,
Oh
for
yeah.
people watching along. Um, yeah, that's crazy stuff. So we've got some ties with some interesting entities. We've got some
Oh,
textiles.
I remember one thing that you mentioned here as well. I should bring up is this boogosphere. You've
Yes.
probably seen this thing that crashed in Colombia. Well, we've been documenting spheres. They've been in my book. We've documented them since 2021. But we found some with, I don't know if you're going to be able to see
Stone
it, but it's
one.
got the same. Yeah, and this is of that geopolymer that we don't have the technology to create today. So that's really high proof. There's also all this black that's on there is
Yeah.
manganese and can be looked at with a microscope to see that that is something that happened through a long period of time.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, the Boogosphere again, it's metal technology, and it was flying and had a electronic discharge and crashed, and they retrieved it. Recently, Stephen Greer went down there with a team, Danny Sheen, and they went and took samples off this thing and did
And they even
preliminary looks
they
at
even
it.
had Stephen Greer. I saw a video from him a couple of days ago talking about how they had some fake police show up to try to take the things.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah.
Yeah,
If that doesn't say anything in itself, there's absolutely, and that shows it might even be above the government,
clearly.
that they're having fake police come in. That's Yeah, I don't know, but it's very fascinating. This technology, I've come to learn that if it's of light and divine, if it's God or a savior of this form, it's probably going to come in a light vehicle. That's the gist from these ancient texts that we get. And so finding steel and these craft that are made of metal is a huge alarm to use discernment in what you're dealing with. This could be like
True.
I was saying earlier, they were supposed to look to the left for a period of time, and now they're looking to the right. The right means they might be able to come back in a physical form. They might be able to manifest in different ways, technologically, being these drones, maybe through AI.
Yeah.
Maybe AI is a digital Ouija board. Maybe they've digitally, got the blood in there as well, and they're
Quartz technology.
utilizing it, and people don't even know it.
Exactly. Quartz technology is fantastic for channeling psychic or spiritual energy as opposed to copper and other things like that, which channel electrical energies. Um,
Yeah.
Channeling thing, like, there's so much. I just want to very quickly do a backup onto the Nazi thing because it is well known, established fact what we're talking about. We're not just repeating storylines from an Avenger movie. There's declassified files that were released, and everybody's aware of this before the movie even came out. So if you're just catching on to the storyline of the history of the Nazis and their interaction with aliens, South Pole, and their exodus
Yeah.
of the planet seemingly, then that's something for you to investigate in your own time there. But channeling itself, going back to the Vril and the other cultures or the other cults that he was interacting with in
Yeah.
Nazi Germany. The Vril are renowned for their ability to act as a telecommunication system for entities elsewhere, as channels. Literally, these were a group of women who, for everybody out there, who were governed by or led by, was it one male? One man, and he had extensively long hair, and all of the women had extensively long hair that would drain and run on the ground behind them and stuff like this. But this was their communication system. When you get into the quantum mechanics
Wow.
and like the stories of Native Americans being contracted to go over to the Viet Cong to track in those types of areas, they had issues
Yeah.
because they were shaving their heads when they went into the army, so they were lost their spiritual connections and they couldn't track in
Wow.
this other country. So then they did some tests like that and showed that they could track if they had hair, but they couldn't track if you shaved their hair off. So this type of stuff. But then you look at the structure of a hair and it looks exactly like an electrical cable, a thin coil on the
Yeah.
outside with things that run
Wow.
like a fiber optic, right?
Well,
Talking about the biggest sphere.
never even thought about it like that, but that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
It is, and
Wow.
I get a lot of that sort of stuff in my areas because I see the similarity between these things as opposed to where somebody will see, well, this is a computer, so clearly it doesn't do anything special. Well, actually, if you
Yeah.
look at the guy who
Yeah.
created IBM, he was pretty freaking wild to begin with. He was a crystal magician, and he created
Yeah.
crystals to make this entertainment device that nobody actually fully
Mhm.
understands, even. So
Yeah.
there is some very big things going on around the planet, and
And who used it first?
yeah, well, as far as we can just
Back to the
generally say.
Nazis, right?
Oh, I didn't even know that. No, I was just going to say the defense.
Yeah, IBM started it with Auschwitz. The first computer was to process the people and manage the people going in and out of Auschwitz.
That wouldn't surprise me. I was doing, in law, I was doing some research the other day as to whether or not what was the foundation of writing, and it turns out that writing might have been created to channel transactions. Right, so
Oh,
numbers were first created to count things, And then we were
Mhm.
counting things and transacting with numbers, and we needed to keep track of these things. And so you look at the Sumerians, all of the writings from Sumer, transactionals, receipts, documented
Yeah,
financial things, accumulations of tallies and things. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
and it's 20 base math too.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Teach your kid that as well, how to count to
Y-
64 on his hands. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That's amazing. So what about this guy on what I see as your left shoulder, not the red-headed one, the other one that you've got there? Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, this is a just a small little statue. In fact, I've got it right over here. I think I'll show you. Yep, I do.
Elongated skulls is a big one all around the world. Everybody knows about, I'm sure.
So this guy here, oops,
Whoa. Yes, that is very small.
is this little tiny guy. Yeah,
That's a good
yeah.
photo of him.
He just, yeah. I love the photography. That's what all my books were inspired because of. I
Yep.
just love to take pictures of these things. They absolutely have a photogenic quality to them that's just,
Clearly. Asking to be photographed.
yeah, yeah.
And of course, I've got to ask you about the one that's behind your head, the one with gold eyes and the headdress. What's that
Yep.
entity?
Well, that one there, he's actually not in the room, but I can show you a similar one. Let me flip my camera around here if I can find it somewhere. There it is. So you can see like this
Wow.
guy here.
Yeah.
I mean, this is about a 3.5 foot tall statue made of it's a green banded calcite,
Yeah.
which is an extremely soft stone. It requires a master to carve this. And
Absolutely.
not only is it here, let me put a light down here. You can see a little bit better. It's completely tattooed
This.
with
Yeah.
looks like the crop circles and stuff.
Yes.
And it's done with, I believe, a laser because it's so intricately just put on there. Here's another one here. It doesn't have the gold eyes, but you can see the carvings a little bit better in it.
Yeah.
It's that I believe this is one of the crop circles here, and I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of geometry. There's seven pointed star on its forehead.
Yeah.
It's got a big depiction of Saturn on the back,
Yeah.
and so these are really interesting.
Ain't.
Inside of these, this is that xenomorph I was talking about.
That's a
Or it looks
xenomorph
like
you're
it,
looking at,
anyways.
isn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's what it seems like. Inside of here are these
Is that,
these
is that
pine
that's a
cones.
heart
What
in
is
the
it?
bottom right corner?
Yeah, a heart. Yeah,
What?
yeah. We find quite a few hearts. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's remarkable.
It's wild. I mean, the originality of some of this. I mean, there's telescopes, and actually, I got one I can show you here,
Whoa.
and it's actually
Telescopes.
got a fluorite lens.
And it
Yeah,
works?
it works. Yeah, it's concaved.
Holy
It makes
shit.
everything upside down and reversed, and has
Wow.
about a 1x magnification. There's obsidian mirrors, scrying mirrors.
Yeah. Oh my God. What?
Pretty wild.
Amazing.
This here, this large skull, it's hollow inside.
Yep.
It's got this big alien on the back, and this is jade, Guatemalan jade. It's 22,000 grams.
What about the gold on it? Is that just it's,
Yeah, oh, it's gold. Yeah,
yeah.
yep. And what's interesting is it's a gold leaf, and each alloy we tested with the XRF, or each patch, I should say, is a different alloy,
Wow.
um, which is odd.
Custom
We
materials.
got these are like alabaster, I believe, vases.
Yeah. See Anubis again.
Have like a, yeah, it's got like a
Ram.
ram head.
Yeah.
And inside of this thing,
Eye there. Whoa.
this weird spiral thing.
Whoa.
Yeah, no, these things were definitely like these weren't used for. I mean, I don't know what they were used for specifically, but these.
Oh, I
These
can.
canopic jars,
Yeah,
these were used, like you open one of these and it'll clear a room.
yeah.
It
I
is
was going to ask you
really,
about
really,
those.
really bad.
So the
Yep.
canopic jars that have been dug out, in some of the photos that look like they had sort of beads and coins in them. Have you been finding canopic jars with stuff? Or
Yeah. These ones here that are on the shelf are absolutely had organs inside of them. And the way I know this is because the smell is very putrid. And that's not enough to say, yeah, that's organs, right? But um, we believe that this culture was destroyed by the flood. And when you're digging for these artifacts in the ground, all of a sudden you'll press your shovel down into the ground and clear the area because it stinks so bad. So there's these pockets of dirt, especially around the artifacts, a lot of times where it just stinks. And so we believe that that's the decomposed
yeah,
bodies in the ground that have completely dissolved because they were in the flood and not in a there was no preservation, you
yeah,
know, because we
yeah.
don't find a lot of bones. Like we do find some, and I've got actually a couple bone samples in
Really?
Europe right now getting tested. Yeah, I've got this was a dagger, and there's a obsidian blade that goes on here, but
Wow.
it's we took the knob off of here. This is where we cut it and sent in the full
Okay.
knob. So hopefully we'll get a really great piece of data on that one. And then we've also got these other skulls I'll show you here
Yeah.
that have been found, and nobody really knows what the heck they are. I've done some fairly decent sleuthing to try to understand. I believe it's a type of an ungulate that has been modified or cut here, possibly, um, or it's a species that we don't know. Uh, but they're
Cthulhu.
fully carved, they glow. It's got the ungulate type of receptacle in the back for the spinal column. So I'm guessing that that's probably at some point. But what's really interesting here with the ungulate situation and the sacredness of the bull and the cow in the cult of Hathor specifically, and the golden bull that was worshipped,
Yeah.
that was not, so that whole story I think has relevance here. And possibly why they use the cow skulls to make that maybe as a sacrum of some form or something like that. We'll find out hopefully here how old it is.
Do you have anyone on site or nearby that you can get in contact with that can look at the I'll just keep it simple to understand the sort of the shamanic side of these things?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I've
Because
got a
these
few
people,
different sources on that because there's the shamanic side of the Toltec,
yeah,
and there's obviously the guys down there in Peru. We've got a lot of connections down there, and
yeah,
they have a lot of knowledge as well. And then there's also a good friend in Ecuador. So we've got a good,
good.
basis of this type of Mesoamerican shamanic knowledge that's doing it. I'm going to reach out to the Native American tribes to get to show them, first of all, what we found. They were here first, and they may have had to completely be silent about this for a long time. So to see it or to understand it, it might be discomforting for some, but also really relieving in others. I feel to just try to, they all talk about their ancestors, but who were the ancestors
Yeah.
and were they human?
I look at this sort of stuff and I take a lot of that. While the stuff that you've got, I have never laid hands on. I've laid hands on artifacts and other things before, and there's definitely an ability that some people have to communicate with the energies that are around these things. So
Oh yeah,
if that's not like if you're not having anybody pick these things up and communicate with the people who use them, there are people out there who can do that. Just to let you know.
correct. However, these are all blood idols made to worship Saturn. So,
Yes.
as far as the energies that are intertwined with them and the connection that they have, I don't necessarily feel that they should be used. Kind of like the Ouija board, how some people look down on it. I feel that there are people who could probably pull good things out of there.
Yes.
But look at the King Solomon story and look at this. Do we need that? We have this one-on-one connection, supposedly that Jesus bring. I mean, is
That's
this
it.
story story. I mean, I didn't believe in Jesus or the religion thing for 38 years of my life. So this is all new to me, obviously. But seeing this type of stuff date back 1850 years plus or minus 125, that's the Lady Guadalupe, which I believe is this Sophia being or whatnot. The weird one here is seeing this as well
Yes.
from the Miko Con. I mean, this looks like an alien Jesus, right? So
Yeah.
what the heck is the inspiration here for
With
this, and
with
how does this
such
fit
effort.
in?
With such effort as well.
Oh yeah, and then
Like
that's
it's not.
not. These are just small samples. The museum that they have. So
Yeah.
the tribe in the Miko-chan allowed me to make a documentary, and it's called "The 10,000 Year Lie" on YouTube, and it's a free documentary that I made. That it
Okay.
takes you inside of their museum, and they have tablets with creation scenes that are 6 foot wide, and that's serpentine jade. I mean, this
Yeah.
isn't just some right. I mean, it's a very hard stone. So the fact they carved all these is just, I mean, but what's really crazy is there's things on there like Baphomet, and if you look at the story of Baphomet, where this came from and how the Templars came, they were persecuted by the king in France, I believe it was, to squeeze this knowledge out of them, and that was what they got out of them. But they didn't get any real idea of who or what it was, other than this being. Well, that could very well be the Sophia, this Baphomet, or something of this nature. But it's depicted with the staff of the caduceus and all these things throughout these pieces, but only in these pieces that are 1,825 years old. The pieces that are 10,000 years old, or possibly. We don't have specific dates on the Tula pieces yet out of the limestone, but we do have star maps and astrolabes that have been dated
Excellent.
2500 BC,
Wow.
1000 BC. So this could have very well gone on for a long time, and it might have be that these pieces from Abuelos, like the sphere that I showed you with
Mhm.
the vats and stuff, it could be that that's the oldest of these pieces, and those date back up to 20,000 years old or so, and then there's this Tula stuff that may be the re-uprising. That's why the stone's different. It's a different type of geopolymer. The glaze isn't as good. Um, but that could be where that shift occurred, because in the Bible it talks about how the Nephilim were there before the flood and after. In Genesis it talks that. So it's possible that the re-uprising was this. And then in the Mormon book it talks about how Jesus had this second coming in the Americas. Well, seeing that cross and stuff, okay, well, maybe there was this, and then they got rid of most of them, but there were still some, and that could be why the whole conquistadors were paid by the church to go and clear house.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. There was I spent 2.5 years in Miami, Florida, dating married to a woman and had a child. We were Mormons going to a very Latin American Mormon church down there, and so I was a bit of a
Wow.
celebrity as an Australian with an Aussie accent. But those guys blew my mind because being an Australian, we've
Yeah.
got a generally pretty sarcastic view of religion, we'll say politely, especially for people who come and
Yeah.
knock on our doors. But I also don't judge. So all of my judgments that I had
Yeah.
growing up, I was like, okay, well, these are just assumptions. I'll give it a shot and see what we've got. But they have some interesting secrets that they talk about in that group. One of them
Hmm.
that you touched on was how the second coming came in America, and a lot of people just sort of roll their eyes and go, "Of course, America has their own
Right.
version of Jesus," like as if it's this stupid thing. And then you have the South Park episode on it, which makes it even more ridiculous. But in
The
saying all
Tony
of that,
Award-winning play. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
saying all of that, what I found most amazing about it was that he followed the guy Joseph, that he followed the instructions of the Bible, and that's how it all started, which was don't listen to other
Right.
people, go out and talk to me, right?
Discernment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Figure it out for yourself. Don't trust others.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
on
And
doing this,
they moved to Salt Lake,
exactly,
and there's that
the
that
terminal,
they were told to go there, and the Grand Canyon. Joseph Smith was known to carry around a sarcophagus. He was known to explore the Grand Canyon, and excuse me, it wasn't the original. There was his sons, or however it processed through. There was multiple Joseph Smiths that
yes.
led the Mormon Church, and but this fascination there is really. peculiar because they found these tablets supposedly where the Book of Mormon came from. And what were the tablets? They were golden tablets with a bunch of Egyptian writing on them.
Yeah.
And we find the exact same description here in Mexico. And not only that, but we find monocles and different scopes. I'm not sure if they're for reading things, but just the way that they described them in this book and how we're finding them, and some of them being metal with, patina that is unarguable on there. Um, it definitely, yeah, you have to keep an open mind. That's my biggest takeaway is just take all these stories, anything that's been canceled out there, any of these celebrities who get pushed off, any of these stories like they come out. I believe there's probably a reason that they got promoted on TV to be shut up or silenced. And those people have probably brought things to light that were, against the narrative in this
Yeah.
situation.
Can't
And
remember his name. Who was it
uh,
that did the discoveries in the Grand Canyon about the cultures in there? Went to the
Kincaid.
yeah, yeah. So clearly you've got some interesting grounds there. But well, I brought that story up
Yeah.
because it also that generally the Mormon group around the world are aware of the fact that as a race, species of humans, we're waiting for more of these tablets to come from the ground. It's actually held
Right.
within them that as humanity grows, more truth will be brought to light.
Yeah.
And yet we find,
Here I am.
yeah,
Yeah.
surprise. It's
It's
just every time
I
a new
can't.
piece comes up, the previous holders of the seat of power go, no, no, we don't approve of that, of course, instead of looking at the data. But
Yeah. I guess. I mean, we've got 6 books out now, so obviously they're approving something.
yes,
There's no way. I know for a fact that they know
yeah,
because every box gets looked at by customs. I've talked to customs on the phone dozens of times. They wrote a letter stating it's all from the Mexican INH, a letter stating that it's all modern, or it has to be because these ideas were not brought up until, Aleister Crowley or whatnot. But that's the same reason that they say that the Baphomet shouldn't be able to be on there because that's a modern thing too. But those Templars in the 1300s, they didn't just pull that out of their rears right then and there. This is obviously something that they held very carefully and closely. And
yeah,
if you look at the Freemasons and what they believed in,
exactly.
or what they believe in rather, in this architect and the 33rd degree, and what the 33rd degree is, and the compass and the square,
Yeah,
and you take the compass and the square, and you've basically got the Star of Remfram,
yeah,
and that Star of Remfram is the symbol of Saturn. So again, we have this Lucifer architect worship this lesser god, I guess, type of control possibly going through our history. And Freemasons are the ones who discovered America. They're the ones who rebelled out and got the funding from the Vatican to get all this going in the first place, which is interesting because the Vatican is, why would they support this? And
yeah,
the Templars, I know from Scott Walter and working with him, he has documents from the Cremona digs and finds there. And inside of that Cremona document, there's the Book of Wars, which is not something that's part of the Bible. No one has a copy of it. And so the Freemasons had this at least chunk of the Book of Wars, and they were holding it over the church as ransom,
oh,
essentially, or as a bartering tool. So somehow in there they were against each other but running in parallel at almost the same type of a goal in the end, and that's very interesting to me.
yeah. No, because you get into the discussion of, some people call it the discussion of whether or not America was Atlantis number two, Kevin Bacon and people like that. So yeah, very clearly something going on for the discovery of America. It was the same as Australia. When Australia was discovered, it was
Yeah.
described as if it was an accident, but then you find out that the royal family sabotaged Captain Cook so that way it would all fall apart, and then he would not be the hero that the royals would and the government would be, and then they can do whatever they want with that. Which is a fascinating storyline because the first thing they did was they come here and went, well, it seems like we've got a bunch of cave people here, so we're going to call it Terra Nullius, which means there's nothing here. Nobody of any importance because they don't have any government structure. There's no societal structure. There's no foundations
Right.
of society or anything like this. But if you talk to them, they talk about how they travel dimensions, how they can see things that we can't, how they're integrating with realities that we can't even conceive of, and things like this. And
Mhm.
then they went bang and sort of killed them all as if there was an issue with that. Yes, there was a lot of violence going on. There's always violence going on, but violence doesn't equate to genocide usually equates to genocide.
Yeah.
Secrets being
Yep.
kept, and
Yep.
erased.
Secrets for sure.
And then you get Pine Gap in the middle of Australia, American Army having a position of, sorry, American intelligence agencies having a position directly in the middle of Australia. It's such an esoteric point. If anybody out there
Hmm.
knows about those, um, amazing stuff, amazing stuff. Talking about Thoth,
Yeah.
Anubis, all of these things. I mean, we didn't even touch on the Emerald Tablets. We briefly mentioned Aleister Crowley. I mean, just a
Yeah.
comment about that very quickly for somebody out there, because a lot of this stuff does get regarded as just fanciful, imaginative, constructive converse that we're just having in discourse. But what we're
Yep.
talking about, when people try to prove something using an aspect of our culture as evidence, like the immigration customs did with your items there, that's like suggesting that this thing that we dug out of the ground from, say, I'm just going to use a random example, pretend one, this block of cement that we dug out of Göbekli Tepe isn't in fact cement, because cement was invented in da 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 da. It's like that's
Yeah.
the evidence of the fact that this can't be cement. It's like,
Right.
really? Is that
Yep.
how we construct arguments and discourse of these things? It doesn't make any
False
sense.
positives.
Exactly. And then, quick, look at that. You know, you've got
Right.
bills to pay,
Yeah,
or.
it's like the Nazca mummies, we
Yes.
found these implants in the chests and all over the bodies, and they have osmium inside of them.
Yes.
Osmium wasn't synthesized or refined until I think it was like the 1930s or 50s.
Yeah.
And to get enough osmium to make these implants in some cases, it's like 750 ton of platinum ore
Shit.
just for one implant.
And that's
So,
ore,
and
which then
and
has
that
to be processed and spit out through an alloy making process and metallurgy and other complicated processes to be able to get to a point of being used before they actually then begin
bingo.
using it. It's huge,
Yep.
huge things, huge things.
Yeah. And that body was dated to 1875 years ago,
I really like
which
seeing
again
this.
brings
Good.
it brings all these questions to the date line of just how long was this going on. And in that documentary I mentioned with the Miko-chan tribe, that they said that their land, it's an oral tradition, was utilized as an experimentation ground from the gods.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what we see. We see all these different, I mean, even just with the Nazca finds alone, we see 10 different races of these beings.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
plenty of them. And we found bodies like the Nazca dehydrated it with this, diatomaceous earth coating.
Yeah.
But not the humanoid or hominid. These were way more reptile. And then that's the funny thing with the DNA of the Nazca mummies, even though they look more hominid, they have a ton of reptilian DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a very important point to touch on. I think it was actually from Stephen Greer for people listening in. The usual discourse and discussion around whether or not something could be DNA replicated using modern technology. It's like you take a DNA sample from these Nazca mummies, you run it through Harvard, and they come back that it doesn't have any alien DNA. And people go, oh, well, I guess it's cancelled. Except people don't understand how these processes work. First, you actually have to have coded information that is alien DNA for the computer to go, oh, it looks like that. But the fact that we don't have alien
Mhm.
DNA encoded in these systems means they can't put out alien DNA, because the only thing they have is human, animal, and biological DNA,
Yep.
right? So you're never going to
Yep.
get a test result for something that isn't actually programmed into the test itself. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? So
Yep.
where do we go from here? What are your plans? I mean, in a week from now, you've got a conference, a big one that is a huge one. I'm really excited to hear about. Do you want to touch on that very quickly?
Which
Summit.
the Geopolymer Conference?
No, the 15th to 18th, the one that has the full disclosure
Nope.
conference.
Not. I'm not gonna go.
Oh, you're not?
Not gonna go. Yeah, I for multiple reasons, but I got something else that came up with this research, and we have a call to go to France,
Cool.
and that's why I asked which one. There's a geopolymer conference in France,
Nice.
and we were invited to go over there. My scientist, I should say, I'm just mentioned in the paper. Like he's in full control of this and knows the science much better than I do because I'm not trained in this. And
Yeah.
he actually worked for Nassim Harriman for years
Oh,
and has a lot of hands-on experience with these pieces as well. Because Klaus Dona and Nassim Harriman were the pioneers to even look at these pieces back in, I think, 2008 is when they first brought it to the public.
yeah.
So um, it's really great to have that many years of wisdom and knowledge in the lab performing these tests. And so, getting I'm not going to say the approval of the geopolymer experts out there, but in a sense, getting them to be on board with this will substantiate publishing the paper much easier than not. So that's where we're going
Definitely.
to go with it. The
Mhm.
conference in Florida, it's some great people, and I definitely feel it would have been a good platform. However, um, I think this getting the science down and doing an internet video where millions of people can see would be far more advantageous in this case because this needs to be out there rather than just at a conference, I think.
That's what really shook me about the work that you've been doing and helping these people with is it was in one of your videos where you were talking about how you first sort of come into it, and then you were talking about how talking to somebody about how to make this acknowledged, and they were like, well, first you need radiocarbon and some datings and some other evidence, and you were like, okay, well, we got all of that, then what? And you've gone ahead and gone all of these other samples and other readings and other tests and things, and like you said, you're still
Yeah,
going with getting these foundational tests, and I
yeah,
applaud you for that, as opposed to jumping on stage and going, yeah, look at me, which is cool. Everybody's allowed to do that. I have no problem with that. But when we're dealing with something like you're dealing with, long-term effort is much more important than short-term recognition, I think. And that's what I hear you
yeah.
saying there, you know.
Yeah, I have to trust my gut. That's what it was so hard for me because I don't cancel on events, and it actually worked out where the guy had overbooked and there, so it made sense. Someone was going to get bumped off if I was going to be there, and so it was just it all fell into place that this was the way I should go with it, and yeah, that's how life is. You can't predict the future. You have to ride the wave and surfs up, I guess, huh?
A lot of people call it, what is it? Manifesting. I call it manifesting
Yeah.
synchronicity. It's just making sure that
Oh yeah.
what you do is in flow with what's going on around you. And that's what I think that all
Yeah.
of these pieces really point out the most is that these cultures are really, and these ancient civilizations are really aware of how we were a lot more than just these physical concepts of, well, I'm a person, I've got to go get a job and eat food, and I'm detached from everything, and I can kill this thing because it's not important. All of these
Yeah.
detached concepts of our society are just stop dead in these bigger discussions. It's
Oh yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's getting to that point where the throttling and the wrangling of the herd is not, the internet's, I think, the biggest thing is us being able to have communication like this
Totally.
outside of media and news and people, millions of people can still see it.
Yeah.
I think that is really what's given us, even though they control those algorithms and things so tightly, things will still get through. And that's the thing. You just got to be persistent about it. Long-term research, making sure, and going through every avenue possible is essentially what we're aiming to do. I mean, I don't want to step on anyone's toes. I'm not trying to disrupt any, major part of this. But at the same point, we're taught in school that our history is the most important thing we have. So,
Yeah. Exactly.
why would I smear this in my teacher's face when I agree with them?
Yeah. That is touching on some very big stuff there. I imagine that you do get a lot of controversy and a lot of hate and a lot of crap. I have seen a couple of your posts about I can't remember his name, the aliens guy.
Oh
What's
yeah,
his name again?
Giorgio. Yeah. Oh
Giorgio.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us briefly how you expect to develop from here? Like, are you expecting to have much more of a problem in terms of it bringing exposure open to the public, or are you expecting them to jump on side now that everybody's getting together in these conferences and sharing work? Because you mentioned something, one of the videos about the Boogosphere was talking about how the Nazca mummies and the Boogosphere people didn't think that either of them were accurate until they got together and they went, holy crap, that's accurate, let's do this. So,
No, no, no. It was the It's that Jaime Mausam and those guys don't necessarily sign on board with these pieces from Mexico.
Yeah.
They haven't done the research, or they're caught in between something to where they're trying to do what they can, but they know they'll immediately be stomped out if they talk about that. And I believe that's probably more of the truth than people, doing things in a manipulative way here. But it's absolutely, moving forward with this is tricky. If I post something, I get 100 people on there saying that's fake, that's AI, and a lot of these people aren't even real accounts. You click on
Yeah,
the accounts,
exactly.
and I mean they have 18 followers and no posts, and it's just these bot accounts and these phone farms that are out there trying to control topics through this type of misinformation. And we even, as you mentioned earlier, was there a body inside of that sarcophagus? And no, there wasn't. But there was this video that was made by this guy that got seen by 8 million people that said there was. So it's like they're absolutely trying to detour it. And when Giorgio made his post on his Instagram stating that all the stuff from Tula was a fake, he initially said that the Guatemala discovery was fake. And then one of my business partners went into his comments and corrected him, and he made it right. But he called it all fake with zero knowledge. He's got a bachelor's in sportscasting, and he's sitting there trying to talk about patina. And the fact you're talking about patina on something that you haven't even geologically sampled. I mean, this is a geopolymer with a glaze on it. It's not going to age in the way that you're thinking it's going to, most likely. It was also buried in volcanic ash. So, we're in a very high volcano range here where three volcanoes are in the, area of covering this and have had, exponential blasts in the past. So when they dig down to the 15 and 16-foot level, they're actually penetrating through three ground floors.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's why, the INAH, when they dig, they only go down to the 11 and the 12-foot range oftentimes. And, they do find these pieces, but most of the stuff they find is pre-Hispanic. And so that's where they claim that. But if you look into like the Cambridge reports of Tula, they don't go down 30, 40 feet or 20 feet or anything like that. So I think there's a real limitation there in terms of the research being done.
I'd always assumed that there was an instilled aspect of archaeology that sort of wouldn't go deeper than a certain level because of this idea that, once you hit the floor of the house of the civilization that you've dug out and are brushing away in, looking for pottery pieces or whatever, you're not going to dig below that house. That would be silly.
Right.
Right? Why wouldn't
Not
you?
in this case.
Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Keep going, Just because there's
Yeah.
one layer doesn't mean there's not more. And that's,
Yeah.
getting into the...
With these SAR scans now, and
Exactly.
the fact they could do this in Egypt. Well, where's the scans in Tula? Let's get this going over here and start looking at the stuff in Mexico and
I'm
the
excited about
Amazon.
that.
And yeah, we have some. I mean, all this thought of us gaining this knowledge in terms of like the age of Aquarius prophecies and things like that. It definitely lines up that it could be this.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
technology, we're at the point where it's going to be pretty moot to refute it at some point, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I really do as well. But because
Yeah.
what you mentioned the Simharamin, we're at a point now. Everybody's aware of AI doing all of these things, but not many people are aware of the fact that people in unified physics and other people like this have working models that are being tested currently around the world. One of them is held by Nassim Haramein, and on his website for the International Space Federation, for anybody who's looking along, you can go to the page of their testimonials, physics testimonials, where they've sent their papers to experts at all universities and all stages of society and all these different, because unified physics requires verification from every field of science. It needs to be verified everywhere. So all of these people are now writing feedback and they're gathering all this feedback on the website, so you can see no one has disproved their math. No one.
Yeah.
This is remarkable because these guys are piloting space age technology, which is
Yeah.
the beginning of our communication with these other family members that we've got in other places. I call them
Yep.
family members because I do past lives and things like this as well, and I've been seeing myself in other beings and interacted with them as well. But like I said, it's just going to get...
Light is light at the end of the day.
Well, that's what I wanted to mention very quickly. We were talking about the metal and taking ships that were made of metal and then not being so quick to jump on board with them because they might have been a lower race or somebody who is using lesser technologies. But
Right.
we've got to remember and understand that everything that we conceptualize in science as a human is an expression of light like that. So metal is an expression of light, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So how you then interact with that light is as to whether or not you're connected with it, or you think that it's a dumb, stupid thing and you need to beat it down into all these different shapes and spread it out into these technological grids and everything. But if you do
Yeah.
it, cymatics is a beautiful way of doing it. When you paint intelligence in a system, like sound does show intelligence in a system, it reveals itself
Hmm.
clear as day automatically with no effort. And then you get rise
Yeah.
to these ideas of creating stones and moving them and anti-gravity technologies. But then you go into the Tibetans with their channels, their vocal channelings and the way that they levitate stones. You know,
Yep.
it's all there.
Yeah.
It really is.
And the Tibetans and the Hebrew both had a specific type of writing called fire letters. And
Yes.
we've had AI examine many of these pieces and the language is on there. We've taken pictures of the tablets with just the language. We've isolated them out into black and white line drawings and then implemented them into AI. So there was no stone or any sort of relevance of what it was. We just wanted analyzation of the symbols
Mhm.
and we had it backtrack and this the words of fire and the divine luminaries were things that it kept translating out of these pieces left and right
Wow.
from that sort of basis and that's I mean it's really just boggles my mind that it can do that but it does make sense to me that it has that ability to cross and like you were saying with the gospel reliefs, how it's a proto language of what we know as hieroglyphics today. These are also proto languages. So being able to analyze these changes over the years all at once with the neural network, that's how they're able to achieve some of these translations that we couldn't even try to see.
I'm gonna have to look into that because that's very interesting if they've done that. Very cool.
Yeah.
We've been going on almost 2 hours now. Thank you very much
Dang.
for your time today, and I would love to be able to talk to you more in the future about some of these ideas, like dive more into Thoth, Anubis, and some of these other ideas, because these guys, while they might have had like Jesus' physical counterparts, are a lot more about the meaning that they contain within reference to the environment that they're contained in, and
Yeah.
that's where the magic lies.
Yep. That might be why a lot of these gods are related to planets in the celestial bodies, I should say, in general.
Yeah, I think so. You know, like if we've
Yeah.
got if you look at the generational aspect of life, grandparents, great grandparents, we've got our parent as the sun, which means that we've got generations of family outside of that. The sun's sun, the sun's sun's sun. So not the center of our
Yeah.
spiral arm galaxy, but the center of the one above that. That's our great grandfather at the moment, or great grandmother, or both, or however you want to see that. So, like, we've got a huge
Yep.
family tree here that we've got exploring and looking out at what we're interacting with in the worlds at the moment. And I find a lot of that sort of stuff a lot more constructive and easy to understand as opposed to the infinite universe paradox, like is promulgated
Yeah.
nowadays. You get rise
Yeah.
to other entities like what we're interacting with through these artifacts, as opposed to just carbon copy cutouts of you and me to infinity. You know,
Yeah. 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 To understand that fractal mentality
yes,
is interesting, because that's what it seems like. You just keep zooming in or zooming out one way or the other, and it just goes.
yep. That's a good actual point. I guess I should plug myself a little bit. For anybody out there who isn't aware of it, I do have a small free course studied to go hyper deep into the Kybalion. So that way people can understand how to
Oh,
think, how to interact with information, and how to use these concepts to teach themselves about how to find whether or not something's accurate or not. It does have the
yeah.
grounds of statements like everybody knows as above, so below, and a lot of
Yep.
esoteric truths that are now lost in a lot of modern traditions. So
Yeah.
I'll add that into the comments for anybody who's interested in that. But Oh, thank you so much, Mike, for your time today and being so open to sharing us all of. I'm sorry for my words. All of your toys there. I don't mean that in a degradatory sense. I mean, like, these are amazing things, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
your time.
Anytime.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, we'll find a time to have another chat, I guess, and we'll take it from there.
Sounds good to me.
All
Have a
right.
great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks for your time today, Mike. Have a great one.
You bet.
Bye.
You too. Bye bye.